Welcome back to It Tastes Like Burning. This is Matt.
This is Jesse.
Before we get fired off today, I just want to remind everyone, if you can and you have a second, we'd appreciate it if you'd dive off and give us a review, like, approval, whatever. Just some sort of golden woodchuck seal of golden awesomeness that you can give us. It really does help spread the podcast. The crazy thing is how much we're growing. Jesse, where have we reached out to recently?
Well, we just recently had some downloads in Germany. So, no sprechen die Deutsch. So, I don't know how that works out, but
I think they're downloading just to listen to you and laugh.
That may be it. I'm almost certain that's what's happening. So,
but anything you guys can do would be appreciated. The other crazy thing is that we're starting to get a little more of an online presence through Reddit and Twitter. You can find Twitter at
ittobcast,
and you can find our Reddit sub handle under the same thing, ittobcast. Reddit is a glorious dumpster of all things internet, and when you truly scratch around in the bottom in there, occasionally you can stomp into some pretty actually interesting things beyond the porn and get into particularly the firefighting subreddit. I found that a lot of time I spend there, it's more career-oriented. A lot of young guys there. But the crazy thing is that you see in the responses, you can just tell by the way some of the responses are. There's some officers lurking in the depths in there, and there's some really, really good topics and some really good responses in there. So if anything, I recommend reading some of the comments on some of the more benign posts, because they're hilarious. Two, there's some actual insight there. And it's just another way to kind of extend your communication and grow I want to say the community, but I mean the community in a broad sense. Because at the end of the day, whether you're one of 3 listeners that somehow or another listen to us in Croatia, or the one guy in Vietnam, or California, Florida, New York, and Germany, realistically, if you're traveling and you walk into a fire station anywhere, it's going to be like 2 dogs at a park. You're going to end up sniffing each other for a little bit, and you're going to be buddies.
Yeah, that's the way it works. Even when you walk into one in New York City, they're the most welcoming guys to fellow firefighters, and they don't care where you're a firefighter at. I mean, you're just part of the brotherhood. So, and I was going to just bring up that Matt and I, neither one are the experts of anything. And most of what we're saying is just based on our experience and our observations and kind of an introspective look at some of these things that we comment on and talk about. But we find it flattering that other people actually want to hear our thoughts and talk through some of these things, because it's not always about us. We're not giving you the answer. We never do that. We just give you our opinions, and where that goes is where that goes, and we generally try to kind of talk down both sides of it, right?
Yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, that's the point, is you can't know if you're ever wrong if you don't either have the discussion or try it.
Right. And
I would much rather know that I'm wrong than to not try it.
Or not know you're wrong.
Right. Well, yeah.
So that's the importance of this. Neither one of us claim to be the expert at any of this stuff, but we do find it flattering, and it's pretty awesome that people are interested in what we have to say. And I think it's more or less because we're willing to have these conversations about some of these topics that not necessarily are the most popular topics, or they're not the topic that you're going to have with the rookies or some of those things and those discussions that were more geared to the leadership of the department.
Probably, one of the unique things, particularly from our perspective and also our organization, is I like to make the joke that I'm a freely elected benevolent dictator. And so I have the luxury of being able to just do something. Don't get me wrong, guys, this is the politics part of it. You have to explain why the hell you're doing something. And if you explain it well, if it blows up in your face, everyone understands why, and you move on beyond it. So that's kind of a luxury I have, and I take full advantage of that, being able to explain why I want to do something, do it, see if it works, see if it doesn't work, see if it something to learn, twist it, mold it, manipulate it, and place it however I need it to work for our organization. And if you don't have that luxury, then the only thing you can do is communicate.
Right. And the key word in that phrase there was benevolent, right?
Yeah.
And so what does that mean to be the benevolent dictator? That means that your focus and your thought is on the betterment of the organization, right? It's not what's in Chief Matt's best interest. It's what's in the best interest of the organization and the people and the members thereof. So,
yeah, I want to add just one thing to what you said there. From my perspective, that's the one difference. I legitimately try and not make the decision based on my personal comfort level or what's going to make my life easier. Don't get me wrong, there's decisions based on that all the time. But if it's making my life easier, it's making my life easier for me to be able to perform another task, subject, topic, whatever, for the betterment of the organization. It's not simply there to make my life easier in contrast to the organization. And I know that was long-winded and kind of weird to get around to say that, but it's at the end of the day, it's the decisions are made for the organization, not for me. And if you are in the position where you're trying to make either minor or monumental changes for your benefit, then my question to you is, how does that benefit the organization?
yeah, because if it's a one-way deal, it's not the right answer usually.
And sometimes, I mean, we'll go down the rabbit hole just a hair on this. Sometimes there's, again, the dictator, El Jefe Grande, he's going to make the decision. And I get it. There's times that when decisions need to be made, and sometimes they're not popular, and frankly, that's the whole purpose of having a chief. Chief is there not to make popular decisions. The chief is there to make the right decision. Okay? And you need to be able to explain why that decision was the right decision. And sometimes that's uncomfortable, not popular, but I would argue you're not doing your job if you're not sitting there and also taking the time to explain why you're making the unpopular decision, but it's the right decision. Where does this look like on a fire department? First glance, it's really going to be it's going to be personnel stuff is where I would say that's at, for just at first glance. Yeah, I mean, I guess technically it could pop up on scenes, but realistically, you have SOPs, SOGs, protocols.
It's going to be that personnel and that the other place where you're going to see it's in like response protocols and stuff like that, and making decision of what's going to go where and how we're going to respond to certain calls, but not on the call itself. I think that on the call itself is those decisions are more or less your officers that are going to make most of those decisions.
At least from my perspective, it is. I can tell you one place where we see it is literally on the political front, and it has nothing to do with the department. It has to do with the other political entities that we either directly work with, we're responsible to, or held accountable to. So you have city management, county management, and then the other first responder entities and agencies that you either mutual aid with or work directly with. And every now and then, definitely not often, but There are certain things where you might be asked by city management to do something that's, I don't want to say asinine because that's not the right word, but from the fire department's perspective, it's not practical. It just makes no sense. But city management, well, they're not on the fire department. They're looking at it from, wild shot in the dark, a management point of view from a fiscal perspective in the city. And there's going to be times that you're going to have to argue with them. And you're going to need to be very clear about those things, whatever it is. And you're going to have to be able to explain to them that this is not the time, or this isn't the topic, or this is why you're wrong. And you can definitely dive into that scenario 50,000 different ways per day.
And all this leads into kind of our topic for today, right?
Yeah, in a roundabout way, we had, what do we want? We'll call him Captain Knuckles.
Yeah.
We had, no insult there, we had a chief reach out to us, and he sent us a question, and I really like this question because it's something that I've actually have experience with, and it was my very first year as chief, and we had this debate, and it's a really important question because what it's telling me is they're really looking at the long term, because they're not looking at this is the election, this is who I'm going to have to work with. It's how do I get the best people around me to go forward? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to read the question and then we'll kind of dissect the question and then we'll answer the question. So the question is one topic I'd like for y'all to discuss sometime in the future is different methods of choosing officers at volunteer departments. Pros and cons for the election of all officers versus officers being selected by the chief and the problems related within each. That's a beautiful question. So, from my perspective, when I first encountered this question, I became chief. The department was, I'll just say, unsettled at the time. We were not divisive, and it's not that we were having problems on scene, because we weren't. But at the station, we had two definitive groups. The dodgeball teams had been picked, and they weren't throwing balls, they were throwing hammers at each other. And at the end of the day, the election was, I'll say, it was divisive. And even though I won, there was a minority that I will say was not in the band camp fan base yet. And my question that I had to myself and our assistant chief, so we had two brand new officers that were elected. So we had a pretty serious turnover from a management perspective. And our department's always been very political. And what I wanted to have achieved was, and my logic and rationale is I'm going to have the membership pick their officers. Okay. So in this case, they're going to pick their captains. They're going to pick their lieutenants. So you had station captains, you had station lieutenants, training captain, training lieutenants, and operations. So there was a grand total of 3, 4, 5 captains, and I think there were seven lieutenants, right. Something like that. And the sole intent of this is if the department's picking their chiefs, we will let them pick their officers. And what I'm trying to accomplish with this is to have the membership literally state that this is the team, this is the direction, this is where we are going with this. At face value, it worked. Because you get a month or two into it and you started to get into a little bit of the sniping, they did this, they did that. And it's kind of a cheap cop-out, but one thing that I was trying to accomplish is trying to get the membership to realize that they need to stop going after each other behind the scenes. You're the one that elected this lieutenant, okay? You need to go talk to them. Stop coming to me with such meaningless, useless drama. I literally do not care, okay? Because they have black socks on and you think they should wear white socks. And we were kind of at that point where the absurdity of the level at what they were nitpicking was truly colossal. And that first month first quarter, took full advantage of that, of forcing the membership to cascade and bounce things across the officers. And I will say it was successful, but there was parts of it that it wasn't successful, because what would end up happening is that they wouldn't get the answer they wanted to hear in this case.
Yeah, so they go ask mom or dad.
Right. And it was still happening. That took quite a while to whack-a-mole. Our department's always, I don't think it's our department. I think every department has a blue hair salon type quality when it comes to the drama and gossiping. I have yet to encounter an organization that functions like a meditating Hindu monk temple.
Yeah, I don't think that happens.
But the little nitpicky kindergarten class storytelling and backdooring stuff stopped finally. It did. It took a while for it to phase out. Consequences of that. So here's the billion-dollar question. If you're truly going to turn your fate over to the membership, okay, and you're going to be unequivocally uninvolved, what are you going to do if you don't be involved in this at all? And let's just say you have two stark contrasting groups in the department, young and old. What do you do when the youngsters that have the majority in the department put a year and a half firefighter in as a captain? Okay, so he's done a bunch of training. He's been active. He's 19. Is that guy really ready for that position? I can't answer that. He might be.
But the good news is his braces help him conserve air.
Yeah.
I don't know. And that's not to say that the young guy can't be ready and can't be ready for some kind of leadership role, because there are young guys, right?
Sure.
That do better than others. But my other department was a totally different scenario than that. So you had, because we were combination paid volunteer, you had the city's paid fire chief, who's the grand poobah, right? He's the guy that's in charge. He controls, most of everything. And that was the guy that appointed me. So I was appointed basically on a Supreme Court life term as an assistant chief at that point. And kind of a complete different scenario, but what they were looking for was more or less who's going to get them the most bang for their buck, right?
Right. And to add kind of what you're talking about there, how long before you were in that position?
Oh, gosh. 10 years, maybe 10 years.
Okay. And where I want to kind of segue off with this is there's a big difference between life experience and age.
Right.
There's a big difference. I'd have no problem taking just whatever, a 55-year-old man that's maybe been on the department for 2 years and having him be a captain if he's legitimately the perfect person from a leadership perspective in that position, because we can provide them the training.
Right.
The training's not the problem. The problem that you have on that is let's cut it back 30 years. So you have a 25-year-old man that still lives at home with his parents and has no life experience, but he's been on the department since he was 10. Okay? They're going to handle situations completely, absolutely, unequivocally different just based on their life experience. And to kind of segue a little further into this, because I'm stealing your thunder and I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
This was part of the discussion when I had decided to have the membership elect their officers. This was one of the discussion that I'd had because we were young dominated, and I was preparing the young guys for their decision, and I just carte blanche hedged my bet on them making their decision and told them, you do not make this a popularity contest. You got to remember the two functions of these officers. There's what they do at the station, and there's what they do on scene. And you take the most popular guy in the station and you make him captain, but he's literally had no officer development, minimal time on scene, and he's barely around the department as is, but he's popular, and you make that guy captain, I'm expecting you to follow him when you're on scene. So you need to be seriously considering what you are putting in place as your captains. Now, me personally, I've always kind of looked as the lieutenant's positions as a good place to bridge. I don't care how long someone's been on the department. I don't care what their background, their age, their life experience is. If someone bellies up to the table and says they're interested in being a lieutenant, and particularly if you have no one else showing interest in that position, then you put them in that position. You give people an opportunity to prove themselves and show how well they work and expand, develop, grow, and use that as a great place to cut their teeth. And then they run those lieutenants' positions, and that now you know who your captains in waiting are.
Right. And I would, just my perspective on it and what I've seen, you see a lot more lieutenants fail at that position than you do captains for that reason, right?
I would agree.
And it's not necessarily the end of the world that they're failing at being a lieutenant. So that's a learning experience for everybody involved. One, that guy that fails at being a lieutenant, he's not going to ask you to be a captain. He's going to back away from that and wait a few years before he tries to do something else again, because he underestimated the amount of work it is, how much time is involved, the politics of it, the personnel aspect of it, hey, so-and-so over here did this to so-and-so over there, and all that stuff that happens outside of just being on the scene and saying, come on, grab that pike pole. That's the part that eats those guys' lunch, is the other half of it, the political side, the time sink, all that. And so they learn a lesson, and that helps those young guys figure out what's actually involved in managing this thing and being responsible to the department. And some of them succeed well at it. Aiden's a prime example of somebody that has succeeded in that role as a lieutenant in training. And I've had several others alongside of him that haven't done as well as he's done. And, for whatever reason, and it's fine. It's just part of the learning and the growth of figuring out what we're doing. And I don't necessarily know whether appointed or elected is which one's better, because I know departments that do both, and I've seen both of them fail miserably, right?
Sure.
Yeah, and I've seen both of them succeed, and I think that's a deeper thing. You've got to really have that introspect to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, you got to hell, I do this now. Even now, we do officer appointments now. Because frankly, at the end of the day, it's just easier.
Well,
And that's just the truth.
and I look at that as, if I'm going to assemble a team around me, I want to assemble the winning team. I don't want to leave the assembly of the team up to people that are not doing it to win, right?
Right.
Not making our team as a whole a winner. And I don't know. I've never been a huge fan of the electing the lower level officers. Just my opinion.
No, and like I said, I completely get it. I can say the year that we elected the officers, I can arguably say that from my grand design plans intent, that the elected officers probably in the long run, if I had to put it a percentage, whether it was good or bad, I would have to say it was 51% bad and 49% good. And it comes back to what you just said. I would much rather be the head coach and knowing who my quarterback is and who my running backs are and who my linemen are and having control of those players in those positions. Because when you appoint officers, you can really explain to them what you're needing, what you need them for. Yes, you are in this captain's position because of your knowledge and your experience, but I actually need someone who's a little more of a hard ass.
Right.
I need you to be the disciplinarian, and I need this lieutenant to be the one that's really being the intermediary between the hard ass and the firefighters. And we need to push that a little bit. And so at the end of the day, I would be more of a proponent of picking your team.
Well, yeah. And the other side of that is you get to have that conversation with them well in advance, right? So you more or less conduct that interview. Hey, do you want to be a captain this next year? Well, here's what I'm wanting to have accomplish with your position. Is that something that you're able to accomplish? Do you have ideas that are going to help this goal be accomplished? And that conversation that happens before that is invaluable because you know whether or not they're going to be able or think that they're able to accomplish the stated goal. Because it doesn't matter if we're a fire department, a business, a football team, a tiddlywinks underwater basket weaving team. We have to have goals, right? And so we have to have those near-term goals and those long-term goals. And a lot of that stuff that's on that yearly basis, that's just all near-term goals. That year is near-term. Like, you don't get to work on the long-term goals until you've been there a couple of years and you're seeing farther down the road. But a lot of that stuff, you've got to know that those guys are on your side on that, whatever the direction or whatever you're trying to do. Because if we're not steering the direction of the department, essentially we're just treading water, right?
Yeah. If you're static, you're sinking.
Right.
It's I don't care what direction you're going, you need to be moving. Because if you're going backwards, even at least you recognize through the change of scenery that you're going backwards. Whereas if you're static, you don't have a damn clue what's going on because nothing's changing around you.
And that's one of the things I see with a lot of departments is they get so static and so complacent, right? You see it, you've seen it around here, you've seen it all over the place. So you've got Chief Billy Bo Jim Bob that's been chief for 37 years, right? And his buddy over there has been assistant chief for 35 of those 37 years. And you got guys that have been captains 20 and 30 years. Well, those are not necessarily the guys that are looking for a change or growth or to do anything different than they've always done. And that's not always the case. And I'll put that caveat out there that there's guys that are forward looking and looking for the better way. And sometimes the better way is not tactics or anything like that. Sometimes the better way is just how we interact with each other or how the furniture is arranged in the station. It could be something minuscule as that, what brand of coffee we're buying, but at least they're thinking about something that's better, that's doing something for the benefit of the department, because it all falls back to that ultimate goal of growing. I don't know one department anywhere that's not looking to attract new members, grow, have more, newer, better equipment, new, better PPE, better training. They all want those things 100% of the time. So if you're not building your team to want those things, you're building the wrong team.
Along those lines of change, that's kind of my brain shot off in this direction. If you're a fire department considering a non-standard option of having the officers elected by the membership top to bottom, that tells me that you're really looking at change, because that's a pretty aggressive non-standard move. If you're looking at doing that, that tells me that you're looking to shake things up, which is awesome. I'm all for it, and I'm not necessarily against having officers' elections. There's certain benefits to taking the department that's in a little bit of a rut and turning that back into, for lack of better words, empowering the membership. And when you're empowering the membership, that might be more than enough of a shot in the butt to kind of get them crawling and going again. So yeah, I mean, I think change in that manner can be something that is worth considering.
Yeah, it can
the
be
only
beneficial.
question that I'd counter that with is, okay, now that you've given the department the shot and you've got change rolling, which way is the roll going to go? What do you want to do with that? What's your end game with that? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to accomplish change to just accomplish status quo? Or are you actually trying to stimulate a change into a specific direction? And again, that direction, that may be 5 years down the road, but you need to get the building blocks and foundation of that change in place early. This is the beginning of that. That's fine. Just I know what you're trying to change if you're changing something.
Right. And know if you've got a good thing going, too. Because if you've got a good thing going from the perspective of the department, and granted, if there's elections and everybody realizes that there's a good thing going, they're probably going to stick with what they're doing. But
ideally, in the event that you have the election, do understand that sometimes the chief's job is to be the unpopular one. Again, they're there to make the decisions that aren't popular. And that sounds appealing when it comes to officer selection, because you can just turn around and kick it right back on the membership and say, well, you're the one that made the decision. Don't blame me. Okay. If that's the case, well, you're the one that's still responsible for the officer. But now you have an unknown quantity in your hand. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, I'm kind of taking that on a pretty deep fringe there. But just understand that you're taking something at face value to try and make the decision easy for yourself, so that you don't have to pick, and you're putting it on the membership. Well, when you do that, you're possibly dividing your groups even further, because the guys gals that are in the minority are going to be even expressed further in the minority by the popular kid being elected. Like I said, I'm really taking that far. That would be like the absolute worst case scenario. I had nothing but a positive experience with it. I mean, that 1 year of doing that's put me in the position that I'm in now.
Well, and a lot of those people that were elected that year are still holding officers' positions today, right?
Yeah, the majority
The
of them.
vast majority of them, other than a few that have turned over for various reasons or whatever, and most of those that turned over are either moved on to somewhere else or gone or had life changes or something like that. It wasn't because this place chewed them up and spit them out. It's because they just went away on their own accord for life, right?
Right. And the other thing I want to add to you picking your officers, don't think for a second that these positions aren't picked politically. They are. And there is nothing wrong with taking your proverbial pain in the butt, your dinosaur, and you don't want to deal with 12 months of drama from one individual and go ahead and putting them in a position that they expect to be in. I legitimately will argue there's nothing wrong with that. What you do is you also turn around and you appoint one of your strongest lieutenants that you have, put them in that position to work directly with that individual, and make it happen.
Yeah, a little mentorship.
Yeah, there's anyone who says that they don't make an officer's appointment based off of strictly, for lack of better words, their resume, I would argue that must be a really small department.
Yeah.
Because you're not having to deal with having multiple people. Don't get me wrong, there's only a handful of people here that are truly qualified to be captains, so that in itself is going to make the day-to-day pick more difficult, but also the people that are quote-unquote political appointments, it's not like they're incompetent.
No. Well, and this place is so weird because there's such a high level of skill and knowledge beyond that of the average volunteer fire department. I mean, good grief, we counted it up one day and there was like, I don't know, 17 former or current chiefs of other organizations that are in our organization, right?
Right.
So
How many hours of training do we have this year?
2,500.
Right. I mean, again, guys, I'm going to brag. It's hard to compare us to a lot of other organizations because we train. We've got over 10,000 hours logged on scene this year. That's on scene. Yeah. We've probably got 50,000 hours total of people at the stations, maybe more, maybe 60,000. I mean,
throw another 2,500 hours of training in there, and throw another, several thousand hours of public events and just public relations stuff with Fire Prevention Month and all that stuff.
I mean, coming off the top of my head, on our active roster right now, just the people I can think of, there's 12 chiefs.
Yeah.
That are either former chiefs or chiefs from other organizations. And the vast majority of that 12 is chiefs of other organizations. And some of those are not volunteer. Some of those are gigantic metropolitan departments.
Right.
Like the largest in the state.
Yeah. And then you take in our reserve guys, that bumps that up to that 17-ish number that I was talking about. So that for somebody to be to that level, to be a captain or whatever in our department, the competition pool is way different than the average, rural volunteer fire department. I mean, that.
Yeah, it's
you're truly competing against some guys that are for some positions. If they want them, that, and not everybody wants, like, understand that a lot of guys that were chiefs somewhere else, they don't want to come here and be chief, officer, lieutenant, anything. Like, they want to go back to dragging a hose and being a firefighter because, frankly, that's what we're here for. That's what we missed. I spent well over a year just being a firefighter and enjoying every minute of it before you asked me if I would tackle training.
Oh, I can tell you, the second that I'm done being chief, that first year or two, there ain't no way, nothing. Now, don't get me wrong. I will help in training. I will dive off in there, okay? But I'm not going to be the registered dog catcher. I'm not going to be the secretary. I'm not going to be the treasurer. I'm going to be unequivocally, absolutely nothing. Yeah. Because there's so much time that goes into this position here.
Yeah, and a lot of guys don't realize that stuff. So, definitely that's a consideration, and especially because I've seen young departments or departments full of those 18, 19, 20-year-old guys just turn an entire department's elections on its head, right?
Right.
I've seen it several times and just sit back and go, really, that's who y'all elected to be your chief?
But I will say, because don't get me wrong, our young guys are also full of piss and vinegar too, and they get fired up. But I will intentionally spend time with them. Not often. It's a pretty rare discussion, but it comes up where I tell them, you got to remember that as much as these positions are popularity contests, they're not. You are literally putting a person there that you, again, is the benevolent dictator. Because once they're there, they're there. And you are there to make the right decision. And it's not the popular decision. And that's a hard thing to remember, particularly for first-year chiefs, first 2-year chiefs, even 3-year chiefs, is make sure that you're putting a person in that position that is going to be leading the department to how you want to see it go forward and how you want to see scenes be completed. That has to be the first priority. It's not, do I like them? It's, will they do a good job?
Well, and there's so many different directions. I just had this pop into my head that I did this one time, and it was not popular. I took a guy that was just kind of he was been there a long time. He was good and solid. He understood what he was doing, but he just wasn't a popular guy, and he was kind of goofy. But I watched this guy for years and noticed that every time we were on a scene, this guy was intently focused on everybody else's safety.
Pretty desirable trait.
Real desirable trait if you're short a safety officer. So, it comes time where I need to fill a safety officer position, and I immediately knew who it was. There was no doubt in my mind. I'd watched him do it enough, and he didn't even realize he was doing it for the most part. But he would just, notice that somebody wasn't heeling a ladder, and he'd go over there and just kind of, hey, why don't you hold on to this? Just in that passing nice, not dictatorial, not yelling at somebody. And he would just fix the problem, and then he would go about, he was doing the job. He was doing the job without the title. And when I announced that night at that meeting, boy, there was just grumbling, and they were like, all right, he's goofy and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but have you ever paid attention to what he does? And they all stop and have a reflection and think about it, and they're like, oh, yeah, he's been doing that job for years.
Wow.
And you just gave him the title. Yes, that's what I did. He's been looking out for you for a long time, so now look out for him. And it was unpopular. Like, instantly, I thought they wanted to turn the building upside down and throw me out of it.
See, and that's a good example of, same thing. So you have your election, It's just, again, you're electing your officers. You can still have your opinion and inform people. Hell, nominate them yourself and say, this is why this guy's being nominated for this position, and vice versa. If you pick him, you're going to pick the individual, and you still tell people why you picked him. Because, again, you can still, even if you're having the full election, you can still, for a lack of better words, help pick your team. You're still drafting your team at that point. And if you're picking your officers, there is unequivocally nothing wrong with giving them a heads up and telling the membership why you're doing it, and vice versa. If you're having an election, there's nothing wrong with spending a few weeks prior to that election campaigning for why certain people need to be in certain positions, and go as far as nominating them in the night of the election. I'll even tell you how I did this the first year we did it. The night they physically had the election, I was not involved at all because I was trying to give the image of being as passive and as open to anyone that was elected as possible. But leading up to that, I had spent weeks preparing people for possible candidates that need to be considered in that. And the reason for that is I didn't want the 19-year-old as a captain, because I would view that as a disaster. Because, again, the qualified applicants that we had, that can't happen. Can't have the 19-year-old in front of the 45-year experienced battalion chief who wants that position and is generally well liked and highly competent, and on and on. It just can't happen. But I want that 19-year-old to be the lieutenant under that captain.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just veer off a little bit from like character traits for certain positions, because I see certain character traits for people working better in different officer positions.
Sure.
So I see your station captain, a bulldog, like that bulldog character trait for a station captain is not a bad trait in that station captain, because that's back at the house and making sure that the house is in order and all that stuff, and that little bit more slightly dictatorial, a little more aggressive in that position. I see that as a positive trait for that person. But that's not necessarily the ideal trait for your training captain, right?
No, yeah.
Or definitely not the greatest trait for if you have a safety officer, the guy that's just going to yell at people, hey, your glove's not on,
right,
from across the fire field and throw stuff at you. That's not the guy to do that job. That guy needs to have some sense of tact, because the reality is most of those things that safety officer is going to find are honest mistakes or oversights, right? It's not, they didn't plan to do that. They didn't plan to not put their helmet on when they ran up there to the front door and go, oh crap, I forgot my helmet. There's no need to just rip them a new one because of that. And so I think that there's some character traits that go along with some of those positions. I think that your training captain has to be the guy that's just basically has all the patience in the world, right? That can explain the same thing to the same guy 10 times if that's what it takes, and do it without being a total ass. And so on and so forth. Your medical officer probably has to have a little more teeth to him because of what he's doing there, and he's more or less enforcing rules that are dictated by somebody else outside the organization. So he's got to have a little bit more by the book, straight down the straight and narrow kind of approach to things. And I think those. What are your thoughts?
No, I'd completely agree with that. I mean, training for a lack of better words, needs to be the kind, open, gentle, you know, for a lack of better words, daycare that, you know, takes a whole bunch of different kids, a whole bunch of different ideas, gets them to all play along together, show them along how to go, and doesn't just wig out the first second that you catch someone eating the box of crayons. You know, and as you segue in from training into operations, no, operations needs to be a lot more white, you know, clear. Cut this black, this is white, and it is procedural, and this is why you need to go through the procedures. Let's take it one step further and you know, go into like the station behavior and tasks and on and on. Same thing. It's more black and white. There may be a little bit more of someone doesn't understand something and you need to take the time, energy, and effort to explain why. But realistically, it's this. And, and there's, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with asking why or having an input. And I would say maybe that's probably the only thing I would segue a little bit on is saying that the station captains need to be a lot more open to input.
Yeah, well, and I think you use your station lieutenant and your station captain. I look at it as a good cop, bad cop kind of sometimes, right?
That's what I was thinking.
That lieutenant plays the good cop, and he goes over there and tries to smooth it over that you just got your butt ripped apart by the captain and tell you this is why he did that and explains it, and that works pretty well in my mind.
And stepping up a little further, I would say in our particular organization that I'm probably the more flexible, open one. Our assistant chief's a little more rigid and direct than I am, but I will hold the line. The difference is that I'm a lot more open to exploring why does that person think that way? What do I need to do to try and either get them to understand the way I'm thinking or see my point of view? And then lastly, what am I missing? Am I missing something obvious? So for me, I have no problem having a discussion and ultimately getting people to see why they're wrong or why they need to change their opinion or why we just agree to disagree, but at least they understand where I'm coming from. And that's me.
Yeah, and I think
there's no way to change that in me because I'm always going to be that way.
Yeah, and I fall in that same camp where, you know, I'm going to explain my thought process and what's going on in my mind and why we're doing this certain way. And then, yeah, if you've got a better way, you've got a better way. I'm completely fine with that. You know, we'll switch gears and we'll go with what you're saying. But I want you to understand what I'm thinking about when I'm making this decision. Because the wrong thing to do is just say, because I said, right?
Yeah, or I know what I'm talking about and you don't. Right. That's a death sentence. Don't ever utter them words as chief because you will get baby seal clubbed immediately and indefinitely with a statement like that. Because there is at no time that those words ever need to be mentioned. Here's why. One, let's say you're on scene, it's an important thing's going on, and someone raises an issue. Then you have the discussion. Maybe short, but you don't just tell them, pipe down, retard. What? That's not going to work. Okay? Because they might be bringing legitimate concern, misunderstandings, clarifications to your attention. Okay? And the second part of that is that you want to talk about something that just automatically deplatforms you when you are truly the benevolent dictator and you're taking the stance of I shall not talk to anyone. Not going to work. It's not how we work on scene. That's not how we function on scene. How on earth is that going to benefit you in the politics with the department, with the city, with the county, with your mutual aid? That is not how that works. When you have a disagreement, you actually talk about the differences and try and achieve mutual understanding.
And 90% of those on-scene altercations or those issues that happen like that, 90% of the time it's because somebody there was two sets of information, right? And neither one of them had all the information. And because some folks like to harbor information like it's the nuclear codes, they don't share that information properly, and it creates those problems.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point to bring up. That is not going to be something that just randomly occurs, just suddenly, all of a sudden, where you're having to pull out a fly swatter or a waffle iron and throw it at someone. That is something that occurs because that relationship's been built, developed, and understood to operate that way. I have information. I'm not going to give it to you. Shut up. You will just do what I tell you and go do it with a smile on your face. Whereas if you operate outside of that, where you're a confidant, knowledgeable individual, they're coming to you because of your experience, your knowledge. That's how the relationship will be handled every single time. And again, it really boils down to the person, just period. I'll never have this problem. I won't, because when people come to me with questions, I answer them.
Yeah,
it's just that simple.
It's that simple.
I'll never have that problem. Like I said, don't get me wrong. It's not that they'll agree with me, and just placidly march off like a meditating Hindu cow.
But at least they understand, or there was the opportunity, and I won't say that they understand. There was the opportunity for them to understand.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes you're just beating your head against the wall, and it is what it is, And if that situation is arising with the same individual constantly, boy, you probably ought to look at some other things there. There's other issues that you're not doing. I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I think it's important, and I think it's a great way to kind of get to the end of this thing. But how do you determine how many officers you need?
That's another good question. And also a routine standard question / problem that we have. And it gets compounded by the thing that we're always talking about with recruiting. So let's say you have you're successful in your recruiting drive. And like us, you had a gigantic and very aggressive and pretty fast turnover from being old veterans to bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and very young. And the problem for me out of the gate, and this kind of goes back to also segueing into this discussion, is that you have a whole bunch of young people that are eager, they want to learn, they want to do, they want to progress, and they're not ready. So you have that discussion, you tell them, okay, well, the problem is that I've got 3 stations, I've got an operations, I've got training, I've got rescue, and these are all large divisions for us. Like I said, 3 stations, these 3 station captains. Theoretically, 3 lieutenants. One of the stations, though, is unique and very small. Sorry for the weird transition there. We had a carbon monoxide call in a full electric house that we had to go to. Don't worry, we saved the day and recommended buying carbon monoxide detectors. So, what we were talking about was you've got a bunch of people on your department, and the question is how many officers should you have? Okay, and I was referencing us. And I want to make sure that I have enough officers on scene, or let me rephrase it. I want to make sure that I have enough officers to make sure I have one on scene. At the end of the day, that's important to me. I'm okay with a lieutenant in command. I would prefer to have a captain. But if you're young and you have a whole bunch of new people, then you get to roll the dice on experience versus just filling roles to fill roles. And I would argue that you make sure you have enough officers to have officers, but don't just fill officers' positions to fill them. Let's go on the opposite side of this. Let's say you're a 10-person department, but you have 9 officers. What?
I've seen that.
You know, why on earth are you doing that to your organization? You obviously just need a chief and an assistant chief. Whatever, one captain.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. You threw a lieutenant in there. So 40% of your department's officers? Doesn't make any sense.
The other side of that is if you're 60, 70, 80, 100 people, how many is the right amount for a 100-member department? I think at that point you've got to kind of create a span of control deal there, right?
Sure.
Maybe you've got one captain and 2 lieutenants, or if you're a schedule based, maybe you have shift lieutenants, maybe something like that.
It's always the proverbial balance between too many chiefs and not enough Indians, and absolutely, no chiefs to tell anyone what to do. And I'm going to just say that the number is, there's no specific number. It's not 25%. It's not 10%. It's not 89%. It's whatever you guys need to be able to have it, make sure that you have either a senior guy on scene or an officer on scene. And at the end of the day, that question boils down to how many people are you getting on scene? Also, arguably, what's the primary scenes that they're first on? In our case, it's car accidents and alarms. That's 2 completely different types of responses and skill sets.
And I don't think you have to hang up on every truck has to have an officer on it, because I don't think it does.
No, not for volunteers.
Not for us anyway. Not for most departments that I'm aware of. Like one on scene or a couple on scene, or if it's a big enough scene, there should be a chief on scene or somebody to that level of skill that can run that call effectively. But I think it boils down to the same span of control kind of aspect that you look at anything, right? And if you've got, let's just say you're in that 100 member department, you probably need to make sure that there's enough of them spread out amongst stations and whatever that you're covering enough of the calls, like that there's somebody there with some kind of responsibility and authority. Because let me tell you, you don't have an officer on scene, not all of them, but there's a chunk of them that are going to want to pound their chest and say, I'm in charge every time, right?
Oh yeah, no, that's a thing.
Yeah. And sometimes that guy that pounds his chest the hardest and declares himself the captain of the day is probably the worst person to be doing that.
I have a tendency to like to let them deal with it once.
Yeah.
And I may or may not go around the other firefighters and people on scene and encourage it to make their lives living hell. Obviously, it depends on the call. Because that'd be a perfect example of a time where it's a bad call. You just whack-a-mole them and put them in their place, and then off you go to actually doing your job.
Yeah.
Other times, if the scene's well under control,
let it be under control.
Yeah, let it go. And if you want to tentatively do a stress test and encourage people to make their lives more difficult and show them how terrible it can be, well, then let it be that way.
There's a lot to be learned as a chief officer to just stand back and watch sometimes, and just don't interject. Don't just let it go and watch what happens, and learn what your people are capable of and what they're doing, and then go in and train and correct any issues down the road after the fact. But you don't have to. You don't have to take it just because you're the chief. You don't have to take that scene and be in charge.
No, yeah. And again, I think a lot of this comes down to leadership style. And this is a style thing. I won't say that there's one that's more right than the other, assuming that the basic standards of safety and competency are being met. I am, if and it's rare, but if we have a big scene, or the handful of times that we've had big scenes, I'm not telling the battalion chief position at how to alter their tactics to handle that event. I'm taking their requests and processing them as needed. The battalion chiefs and the captains and operations, they're the ones that are tactically setting up that scene. Now, when you get to more of kind of a bread and butter mutual aid double wide trailer fire, you show up on scene, you know who everyone is on scene. I guess we'll just call it the luxury, privilege of command usually just being turned over to me. I don't even ask for it.
Yeah.
I just go to check in and I'll be asked to take over command. Okay.
Yeah. Generally not a problem.
Yeah. And I have no problem turning command over to, let's say the chief does show up for that district in 5 or 25 minutes and he bounces on scene. I have no problem giving that man or woman a debrief and offering for them to take over their scene in their district. That is, I have no problem doing that.
No. I do have a problem, however, with people that assume that they're going to take without a debrief, without, from 2 blocks down the road, they get on the radio and say, I'm taking command. Negative.
Yeah, thankfully that's usually not too big of a problem here. It does happen occasionally, but that's usually something that's kind of resolved off on the side, not in public.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that once you establish it and you're in command, that it's yours, whether you're the lieutenant or whatever, and I'll go talk to you about it and let you know my thoughts and suggest, hey, I can take that if you want me to.
Well, and I mean, but same thing, you can build and develop off of that too. I mean, it's a good confidence builder in your young men and women when they do step up to the table, yeah. And you don't just sit there and be like, idiot, what are you doing? And just take the scene over from them and then immediately bust them down back to hump and hose. I mean, because that's how they're going to interpret it, instead of just sitting there and saying, okay, it's yours. And by the way, you need to consider these 5 things right now. Okay. Get it. They got to cut their teeth somewhere.
Yep.
So you might as well take full advantage of it.
Yeah, but not from 3 blocks away.
No. Or even after you show up on scene and they give you a debrief. Whatever. You don't have to take command over. You can tell them, yeah, that's awesome. Good job. Keep doing that.
Keep doing that. Yeah, because definitely there's a lot of perspective that can be gained just watching, because you're not, as an incident commander, you're not focused on the small picture anyway, but to be removed from the responsibility of command and take that one more step back, there's a lot of things you see that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Right. Yeah, it's that's a different rabbit hole though.
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
That's a completely different one. Yeah, just to segue back, the amount of officers is a good question and it's kind of hard to answer. I'll give you a perfect one. So you had the right guy, right person, right position, but they're never here. Do you remove them as an officer? Okay. Yes. Well, how much drama does that create? Does the membership want this? Or is it something where you can just say, you know what? I'm going to give them a coordinator.
Yeah. Or another lieutenant.
Or a lieutenant. And that's another way to handle like kind of a tricky position. You know, let's say you do have a rescue team and you don't necessarily have the strongest person on the planet to put in there as an officer, put a coordinator in there and tell them we're having tryouts. This is your year to make it yours.
Yep. Well, do you got anything else on the whole topic that we've
No,
bounced all over?
It really is. It's a fantastic question of, do you elect your officers or do you appoint your officers? And there's pros and cons to both. I don't think there's actually really a clear answer to it. I personally, in hindsight, think that where I'm at now and where we're going, I would much rather pick my team and explain to everyone why it needs to be that way. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of times when you might want to have the membership make their own choices. Because again, you can get a pretty good continuity of officers if you're having the membership pick their leadership who they want to follow. There's nothing wrong with that. And there is benefits to that, but there's also some caveats.
Yep. Definitely.
Other than that, I guess, I mean, boy, we could go really deep down the rabbit hole on some of these and turn it into a 50-hour discussion if we wanted.
An enduro discussion.
The only other thing that maybe I would add to counter to this is the size of the department, because of the political divisiveness of what elections can be sometimes. It seems like 1 out of 10 of our elections are pretty spicy and pretty wild. And maybe your department doesn't have that sort of soap opera dynamic to the elections. And it might be with a larger membership and kind of getting that unified goal of, one leadership, one election, one vision, this is the direction we're going, can be a good way to pull the department along, or it can set the two sides to absolute war if the minority loses or they feel misrepresented.
Yeah, you definitely have to read the room, and I would honestly say that one way or the other, don't let the tradition of how you've always done it necessarily dictate how you're going to do it going forward. But if you do change something like that from one way to the other, that's got to be something that the department as a whole is on board with.
Yeah, I would compound that for sure. That's a discussion. If you decide to kind of go, so you reference your Constitution and bylaws, articles, whatever you have, and it says the chief will appoint. Okay, well, that's pretty cut and dry. And that's how ours was written, and I can tell you how I got around that. I said the chief decided to appoint by election. That's how I handled that. But that was not a shot from the hip behind a tree, and ran away. Like I said, we talked about that for a month before we pulled it off. So the membership was very well informed as to the who, what, why, when, and how of we were going to do this.
Yeah, and the opposite is true too. If it says that the membership shall elect all officers, I mean, boy, you gotta really lay the groundwork out there, and maybe if you're the new chief and you want it to be your team that you've picked, you probably got to nominate those people, and you've probably got to really campaign for them hard.
Yeah, that's how I would handle it.
And
Is
make
just
that work for
tell people I'm going to nominate Skippy over here, and this is why. And then you talk to Skippy and you tell him, like, damn it, I need you to actually do some campaigning. Because that's one thing that always infuriates me is when people are chiefs and they say, well, I'm not political. Then how the hell did you become chief? It's a political position.
Yeah. Or you don't campaign. I'm the world's worst. I always just tell them I'll do whatever job you need me to do. The department needs me to be the official bay sweeper. That's the job I'll do. And I'm not looking for any particular position at any given time. Like, I'll do whatever job. I've done them all. It's not a big deal. But I'm not outgunning for somebody's position.
I think the last thing that I'll end on with this, and it is election related, a classic pitfall that I've seen with our organization and other organizations is, why are you chief? Is it because no one else will do it? Well, that's a good time to stop being chief. Because there's nothing wrong with forcing the membership to be uncomfortable. That's as a good a reason as any to stop being chief, is when the membership says, well, no one else will do it. No, that's the perfect time to get someone else in there and force it, because I will always argue that change is good and different perspective is good. And any time that I've ever, no matter what organization it is, the first rebound hop out of a new election, fresh perspective, new person in the position is good. Now, does it end in tears sometime 8 months, 12 months later? Yeah. Okay. Because they weren't prepared for it. They weren't ready, or it was just the wrong person. But the initial full court press that you get from the membership with change is a benefit. The question is are you politically adept enough to wrangle it, contain it, and write it?
Yep. So just want to definitely thank everybody who listens at this point. This year was our first. We started this thing in March, and we're getting winding down to the end of the year. I don't know that we'll have a Christmas episode. We may skip that one, but we may not. But I mean, we've put out with this one. It'll be over 1,500 minutes of content this year. That's a lot
for tens of listeners.
And
we appreciate you.
Yeah, so we definitely do appreciate you guys, and hopefully our letter writer got something out of this conversation.
And even if you did or didn't or hated it, just let us know. You got our email, let us know. Or if you would particularly like to see a different variation or deeper dive or just a completely different subject, by all means, shoot it at us, because we'd appreciate it. Other than that, you can reach out to us at ittasteslikeburningcast @gmail.com, and you can find us on Twitter at ITLB cast, and the same for Reddit. Thank you, and have a good night.
Good night.